Nick Tyrone, neoliberal centrist dad. I'm here to talk about something that happened at the Your Party conference. The Your Party, and it's officially called Your Party now, is the party of Jeremy Corbyn, Zara Sultana, although which of the two are still involved with it, maybe this time next week, who knows. It was held in Liverpool, the conference, and it was a total disaster. Looking on it, I thought it was going to be pretty cluster FUCK-ish before this weekend came and went, and it was worse than I could have ever possibly imagined from the perspective of the people within it who would actually like it to function as a real political party. There were constant shutdowns of the moderators on the stage for people. There were, all sorts of people who were like parodies of left-wingers, sort of people who essentially, if you took a right-wing shock jock and they tried to do a satire of a left-wing person, they wouldn't have been this bizarre and weird and completely off the chain, to use an old phrase. So, but I want to pick up on one particular thing that happened at your party conference. This is following on from a lot of the videos I did over the summer, some of them from Ireland, some of them from England, about Anglo-Irish relations. And I think this is one I really wanted to pick up on. There was a particularly pretentious speech from a person on the stage at your party conference talking about how... so the basic words were, "We will never prop up the British state." That's a weird one, considering, at least in theory, they are angling to be the government of Britain. So that's totally weird. But anyway, fine. And they will not support the idea of an entity called the United Kingdom. Okay. And this was all leading to this idea that the Your Party is just reflexively pro-United Ireland and reflexively anti the whole idea of Northern Ireland existing, and reflexively for some sort of socialist Ireland. I say reflexively because actually none of this is thought out, and none of this actually makes any sense really from within the core of what they supposedly want. One of the things that the left in Britain will do, and the left in other parts of the world do this as well, particularly in America, but the British left are really bad at this. And they, on one hand, say, it's not for us to decide what should happen in other parts of the world. We shouldn't get involved. We're the oppressors, because of the British Empire, blah, 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 blah. We have no say in what goes on. And then they're very happy to weigh in to whatever, whenever it suits them. Israel-Palestine just being the most glaring, obvious example. But with Ireland, I suppose, at the very least, you can say, well, there is something to that given Northern Ireland's part of the United Kingdom. So I guess as Brits who hate Britain, I mean, I'm sort of kidding, but not really, actually, because a lot of what this comes down to is the British left don't like Great Britain, and they can never understand why British people don't particularly want to vote for them. Generally speaking, if you aim to govern a country, you have to like it at least a little bit. I mean, loving it would be preferable, but at least not hating it should be a bare minimum. And they don't do that because they don't want to support the entity known as the United Kingdom, which is the thing they also want to govern. Anyway, all this really is about they are reflexively for a United Ireland because they feel that is the progressive idea. Whatever you think about a United Ireland, I have pontificated on this before, and I think that Brexit, for the large part, made it sort of inevitable. I think Ireland will be united. Do I think that will make Ireland as a whole more progressive? Certainly not necessarily. In fact, one of the things that could happen if there was United Ireland is having Northern Ireland within it could push it to the right. Because you could end up, particularly given you've got an STV voting system, a PR system in Ireland, you give the Northern Irish, the Protestants will organise and maybe hold the balance of power. That's not in any way unforeseeable. So I think the idea that a United Ireland would be more progressive or more socialist is nonsense. And is basically said by people who don't know anything about Ireland. Because one of the things that you have to understand is the left like to talk about Ireland in a particular way, and the right, the British right, like to talk about Ireland in a particular way. And both are, generally speaking, and there are exceptions, but for the most part are drastically and hilariously ill-informed and just have no basis with Ireland in 2025 whatsoever. So a classic on the right, just to get this out of the way, would be how there was this presumption that when Britain left the EU, Ireland would very quickly follow suit, because it just has to, because obviously Ireland just has to do whatever Britain does and follow in its wake, and it can't possibly, how could it possibly succeed in the European Union if Britain wasn't going to be there, and the Irish were going to help their British cousins out by leaving the EU for the sake of Britain, which is, I mean, insane. I thought it was insane at the time. It feels even more insane several years on. But honestly, the left are no better. They are absolutely no better. In fact, I think they're slightly worse, because they feel like they need to sort of, in saying, well, we'll get rid of Northern Ireland and we'll give the Irish their unity. They are sort of playing into a little bit of the white savior thing that they hate doing. You know, it's this idea of Britain's horrible because it's, colonial and the empire, etc., etc., etc. But ultimately, it's in our hands as British leftists to decide what Ireland should and should not become. There's just a hint of that. And I'm sorry, if you don't believe me, you can go look up the Your Party clips. They are dripping with that sentiment. They're dripping with the, we are horrible, we the British, we are horrible imperialists, etc. But we are imperialists, so we're going to just keep being imperial. We'll do it, as lefties, we'll just do it in a progressive way that's just for the good, because we've decided that we know who the good guys are and who the bad guys are everywhere in the world. And not only is our decision final, but if you don't agree with us, you are evil and you should be cancelled, etc., etc. Maybe even killed if we had our way, but we were not going to say that, are we? That would just be bad. We certainly don't want to say that before you have any political power. People tend not to like that. You sort of hide that stuff. This is what communists and fascists learned repeatedly throughout the 20th century, and those lessons have been retained, I have to say. Anyway, sorry, that was a bit harsh, wasn't it? But I don't really regret saying it, because honestly, it's this... when I listened to the Your Party stuff on Ireland, and there wasn't much, like, don't get me wrong, if you're thinking it dominated proceedings, of course it didn't. What dominated proceedings was people arguing about procedure, people trying to backstab other people within the Your Party, and Palestine. I mean, those are the things that dominated. It doesn't take a brain surgeon. You don't have to have seen any of it to know that that was the case. But Ireland did come up, and when it did, it was pathetic and sad and not in any way grounded in the reality of modern Ireland or what a united Ireland would mean, actually. In fact, in a weird sort of way, their ideas around a united Ireland aren't really that far from their ideas about a Palestine from river to the sea. It's not taking into account in any way, well, you've got a group of people and there's history here, and you've had conflicts sort of flare up now and again along sectarian lines, and geez, if we change things quite drastically constitutionally, what would that mean? And how would we deal with communities that feel under threat? How would we deal with people with, if Ireland was united, how would you deal with the really hardcore Protestant minority? And they certainly would be in a united Ireland. How do you deal with that? What are you going to do about that? What do those people do? How do you keep those people happy? How do you not have those people poison the well? Because if they can get elected, maybe they'll get elected and they'll try and, maybe over generations that will all sort itself out. But immediately, maybe that will be like something to consider and wonder about. Maybe a united Ireland will make Ireland overall worse. I mean, Ireland's had a pretty good couple decades now in when things have been going, the economy has grown. It's the most prosperous era, really, certainly since Ireland became an independent country. Do you want to jeopardize that to bring on Northern Ireland and all of its issues and all of its problems and try and, get them to work within a united Ireland? Will that work? I mean, I'm just saying, probably it will. and probably it will be forced to come to a head, and everybody will have to deal with it somehow. But I think actually, I don't know. I just find the British left and their attitude towards these things so bad. You know, if you just don't think anybody should be involved in this stuff, then don't be involved. You know, don't tell people in Ireland what should and shouldn't happen when you know literally nothing about it. And what you've decided is that a united Ireland is the progressive choice. And again, I just want to be clear on how much horseshit this is. If somewhere along the line, for some reason, right, and a lot of these things do just turn on almost nothing, if somewhere along the line it had somehow become the progressive British left position that having Northern Ireland exist was the progressive choice, then they would fight for that. And they would come up with some crap about why that was the progressive choice. It doesn't have, what I'm trying to say is it doesn't have anything to do with the reality on the ground. It doesn't have anything to do with what's going on in Ireland. It doesn't have anything to do with what's going on in Northern Ireland. It has nothing to do with what a united Ireland would or would not look like, or whether a united Ireland is or is not a good idea. It has 0%. Okay? Zero. It has nothing. 0 out of a million. Okay? If we were ranking this, you know, from this is about something that's very, very well informed and is really on the ball, and that's 1 million, and 0 is it has literally nothing. It doesn't have a cell in the game. It doesn't have an atom in the game. Then it's 0. That's the British left's attitude towards Ireland. That's what it is. Totally uninformed, just know nothing, rubbish. And I just think that's worth commenting on, because I think people comment all the time about the British right's attitude towards Ireland, which is ill-informed and dumb and imperialist often, not always, but often, and just sort of always comes back to the idea that Ireland really kind of should still be part of the United Kingdom. And they've gone off and they've done this thing, but eventually they'll come home. I get all that. I mean, and that is rubbish and silly and pernicious and all those things, right? I just don't think the British left's opinion is better. In fact, like I've said, I think it's worse. And really, all it really comes down to is why do they feel this way, and why do they hang on to United Ireland as being a good idea? It's because they hate Britain. That's really it. They just have picked a position that's about hating their own country, because that's what they care about. So if the position is this worse for Britain? I mean, that's what they'll decide. And it might, you know, in reality, it might not even be. I mean, a united Ireland in many ways could be long-term better for British cohesion. You know, Northern Ireland's always been a kind of weird... It's been the sort of the odd one out. I mean, partially because it's not on the island of Britain. And so that's sort of kind of inevitable. And again, I'm not even saying that's the right or wrong thing. I want to be clear about that, right? I'm simply saying that it's entirely possible that a united Ireland works out over the 20 years from when it happens, right, forward. It works out better for Britain. That's entirely possible. But that's not the way the British left are viewing it. They're looking at, well, Britain will lose this. It will be a hit to British pride. Britain will be smaller. Britain will be worse off. That's better. That's better for everyone if you hate Britain and you live in Britain. It's a weird psychology. But, you know, they're getting it really. Do they get it from, is it endemic of the left? Or is it something that they're getting from America? Because, I mean, an important element of American leftism is a hatred of America. And this idea that anything that America does is bad, and anybody who's enemies with America are good, and they should be lauded, and et cetera, et cetera. So is it just carrying on from that? I don't know. Maybe a topic for another video. But I've said enough. I wanted to keep this short. The British left and their attitude towards Ireland, bad. Don't listen to them. I'm sure most of my Irish listeners will not be listening to them, and that is, they are perfectly correct in not doing so. But certainly don't look at them as your brothers in arms or some crap like that, because trust me, they don't care. They don't care at all. And if it came down to it in terms of who they would care about in the world, the Irish would be like way, way, way down the list. Because ultimately, sure, they kind of see the Irish as having been hard done by, you know, because of the UK, and they were in it, and they had to, you know, fight for their independence. So they'll see the Irish, but ultimately, they kind of see the Irish as sort of a bit like them. and they see themselves as sort of like unworthy scum. So not really good to be lumped in that category if you're Irish. Anyhow, no, I really will stop now. Neoliberal Centrist Dad. If you got this far into the video, please like it, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, positive or negative, I don't mind. And see the next video. And on that note, I'll see you soon. Bye.